Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the weekly research seminars of BrIAS. I'm very happy to see so many people because there's a train strike going on, so thank you for joining us today. Today we have the pleasure to welcome Leonardo Puleo, and to introduce him we will have Pietro Castelli, who will say a couple of words about Leonardo's work. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, just to introduce Leonardo. So Leonardo is a fellow researcher, a postdoctoral researcher at the European Institute, at the IllibEU and at Cevipol, where he just started this year FNRS postdoctoral fellowship on the topics that he will be discussing in a moment, so on illiberalism. And prior to that, he obtained his PhD from Scuola Sant'Anna School and University of Florence in Italy. He was already with us a few years back as a visiting doctoral researcher, and then as a postdoc and as an instructor, as a teacher in at ULB. And from 2023 until now, he was working as a postdoctoral researcher at the University College Dublin. His work is in general on party competition, I would say, even though in his more recent research, he's focused specifically on illiberalism as an ideology, illiberalism as a party feature. But I leave you the floor to tell us more about it. Thank you very much, Leonardo, and thank you, Silvia, and everyone for hosting this event here.
Hi, everyone. Many thanks for being here. Thanks for this very nice introduction. It's an immense pleasure for me to be here with you to discuss my research. This is a great opportunity. Today I will try to start with this big question here. Why is illiberalism gaining ground within European party system? This is an ambitious question. I'm sorry, I will start lowering the bar of your expectation because I will not be able to provide any definitive answer to this question. I hope I will contribute to answer to it in a couple of years, in a few years, when I will finalize my postdoctoral project, FNRS project that I just started, Party-Based Illiberalism in Europe, IllibEU. And now what I will present is the overall architecture of my project. For a scholar, probably the beginning of a project is the best moment in order to present. I can still take on board all your comments. I can still change my plan on the basis of your feedback. And also for you, I mean, you could also increase your criticism because nothing is set in stone, so you will not break my heart with your eventual criticism. So let's see together what I'm trying to show with you and try to present today. So first of all, I would like to start showing the problems that I see on the ongoing discussion on illiberalism that, as probably you know, is affected by a lot of hype over the last years. I will try to show what I think is problematic with this literature and with the existing accounts we have on illiberalism, at least from the perspective of an empirical political scientist. Of course, I will introduce my takes on this debate and what I mean for illiberalism and my definition of party-based illiberalism. Then I will show the architecture of the project, the nodes, the sub-question that I see in the project, and the way in which I would like to combine a large N and a small n design. And then finally, I would like to share with you some ideas that I've been developed for the measurement of party-based illiberalism, and I will show the code book that I intend to apply to Party Manifesto using Manifesto Project Corpus and large language models. So these are the goals for today. So I think we can start, and we can start discussing the issue of the definition of illiberalism. So over the last year, we witnessed the publication of a lot of articles. Not one, but two handbooks have been published on illiberalism, one by Routledge, one by Oxford University Press. So we have a lot of different takes that nowadays are trying to identify illiberalism, right? All these attempts can be classified, let's say, as ideational, in a sense that they are dealing with ideas, ideology, and script. So illiberalism has indeed been understood as an ideology, of course, always a thin-centered ideology. However, we see really a lot of variance in the illiberal supply. So approach illiberalism as an ideology can be problematic because it lacks of a minimum degree of coherence. And indeed, others attempt that try to define illiberalism have tried to lower a bit the bar, trying to define illiberalism as something less than an ideology. And, for example, it is has been proposed the idea of illiberalism as a script. Illiberalism as a script, as a reaction to the liberal script. Now, liberalism and the liberal script is quite a mess. All the scholars of liberalism, right, Frieden, Bell, Zurn, Tania Borzel, when they start discussing liberalism, the first things that they say, look, liberalism is very fluid, is a very erratic concept, is very difficult to define, almost impossible to find an undisputed core of liberalism. So defining illiberalism, mirroring something that is already very fluid, very fuzzy, might be risky. Might be risky because, of course, the risk here is the multiplying by two the fuzziness, the conceptual fuzziness here. And more importantly, from my perspective, the use of this notion of script is problematic because the idea of scripts make this metaphor that we are comparing a liberal script that is opposed to illiberal scripts, right? So liberal versus illiberal. However, and we will see later in a moment, I think that huge contradiction with the liberal script can emerge within the liberal script already. So the liberal challenges against the liberal script are not always external to the liberal script, but can emerge from internal contradiction. And finally, a parsimonious definition has been provided by Jolt and Yedi, and here his idea is to moving a bit away from this liberalism as an ideology, as a script, and consider illiberalism as an opposition against the principles of liberal democracy. And here he talks about opposition against neutral state, opposition against open society. There is a huge degree of arbitrary choice here in identifying neutral state and open society as the only principle of liberal democracy against which illiberalism is opposing. We could continue discussing all the other definitions, but we will consume all the time that we have available. So let me jump to the biggest problem that they see with all this understanding of illiberalism. Now, all this understanding of illiberalism conflate illiberalism at the end of the day with populist radical right. And this, I think, is very problematic because in this room, we know, I think, that Trump is illiberal, Marine Le Pen is illiberal, Santiago Abascal is illiberal, Giorgia Meloni is illiberal, because populist radical right, by definition, is at odds with the principle of liberal democracy, right? No, now, life is short, and I don't want to spend 3 years studying the fact that these guys are illiberal, because I think we all agree that these guys are bringing tension against liberal democracy. And the reason why I don't want to do so is because I think that out there is something more interesting about contemporary liberalism that we should study, of course, together with the liberalism of this guy. And what I think is interesting, for example, could be the ghetto law implemented in 2018 by Rasmussen government, supported also by Mette Frederiksen, a law that transgressed any liberal principle of non-discrimination, planning the destruction of residential block to gentrify Danish area, where more than 50% of inhabitants were considered descendant from, quoting, non-Western countries. Clearly, this was in violation of principle of equal treatment and has been recently sanctioned as such by the Court of Justice of the European Union. But we could also think to the broad illiberal repression that we witnessed in Europe against freedom of association and expression during the demonstration supporting Palestine, or more in general, also the criminalization of other activists. And this also occurred on legislative grounds, because we have seen Federal Police Act reform in Germany, Ley Mordaza in Spain a bit before, Decreti Sicurezza in Italy, and so on. And also, if we take into account the constant threat of the use of the Article 49.3 by almost all Macron prime minister, we should try to consider this as an attempt to compress horizontal accountability of power and to compress the power of the legislative, extending the executive prerogatives. These are just examples, but I think that the message is quite clear, and the message is that illiberalism can also be implemented by actors that are not from the far right and that define themselves as liberal actors. Now, I don't know whether Frederiksen or Macron or other mainstream leaders, in their mindset, they are thinking to improve liberal democracy in their countries, or whether they are dreaming like autocracies. I don't know, but what I know is that their governments, their parties supported, implemented pieces of illiberal legislation. And I think that it is important to understand why this occurred. Okay, this we can jump here. So we are getting closer to my own definition. So the overarching idea is that illiberalism can came from different foci, from different sources. Of course, it can came from the far right, it can came from the, let's say, loser of the Enlightenment, all those streams of political thought that are in opposition with liberalism. It can came from all the political experience that have even shallow connection with the authoritarian history of Europe, so far right in one word. It can, of course, be connected with populism, because populism, again, is by definition in contrast with liberal democracy. But as we have seen in previous example, it can came from actors that declared themselves as liberals. And here, I mean, I don't want to reinvent the wheel, because this is something that is well known in political theory and in political science. Probably one of the greatest reconstruction of this trend is a counter-history of liberalism by Domenico Lo Surdo. He's a Marxist political theorist, and in this book he shows very clearly how racism, colonialism, slavery, these are not accident, they are not external, they are not part of another script, they are part of the liberal script, and they are linked with liberalism and its feature of fostering competition, individual domination, and so on. But I mean, if you don't like ugly Marxists, then we can also refer to more mainstream liberal scholarship like Michael Frieden, and also Michael Frieden, for example, when talk about neoliberalism, when talk about Milton Friedman, Chicago Boys, is seeing neoliberalism as a stretch of the liberal principle. But again, I mean, if we want to go closer to political science, Desmond King, more than 25 years ago, showed how eugenetic policies, also the reduction of electoral franchise for women and black people, were often justified in the name of liberalism. So this discussion could go on for ages, but I think that my point is now clear. Now, stop pars destruens, and I think that I provide a few evidences in order to motivate why we need a definition of illiberalism that is both parsimonious and inclusive. It should be inclusive because we have to include here both ideas, okay, but also practices. So my goal in defining illiberalism is to provide a definition that can be manageable for empirical analysis, right? So from here, I'm trying to define illiberalism as a set of practices and ideas that stand in tension with core liberal principles of minority rights, civil and political rights, horizontal accountability, and the rule of law, as embedded in 20th century constitutionalism. What I'm doing here is very similar to what Jurn and colleagues did in defining the liberal script. So I'm trying to using a sociological descriptive approach. So I'm considering illiberalism as a tension against those aspects that epistemic communities, constitutions, consider part of liberalism. Again, minority rights, civil and political rights, horizontal accountability of power, and rule of law. These elements, I think, can be measured. These elements, I think, can be part of political parties' supply, and this is something that can be applied for empirical analysis. Of course, I understand and I acknowledge that this is an operational definition. This definition is not going to satisfy a political theorist, but at the end of the day, as a political scientist, we are a sort of Oompa Loompa of social science. So our goal is to discuss, when discuss concept, is to streamline boundaries, to operationalize, and then to measure. And I think that this definition can accomplish to this task, and these are the assets that I see in this definition. It can explore both ideological and strategic form of illiberalism. It can transform the ideological debate on illiberalism into an empirical question. Here we are no longer interested in defining illiberalism as a far-right or far-left or populist phenomenon, but we have a definition that allows us to capture different configuration of illiberalism. Then, according to me, the ideological embedding of illiberalism becomes an empirical question. So, which ideological alignment present an higher illiberal supply in Europe? This is something that we can explore empirically with this definition. And we can explore this empirically because this definition allows to measure the different formula that illiberalism displays in political party. It can arrive in a, let's say, punctuated fashion, so a political party that introduces a neoliberal stance on a policy, or illiberalism can manifest as a coherent illiberal packages, so as a coherent opposition against minority right, horizontal accountability of power, and rule of law. And as I said before, this definition can be already okay for measurement, so can be used already as it is for analyzing illiberalism in political text, speeches, manifesto, interviews, legislative bills, and so on. Okay, so discussion on definition. Okay, so let's move to the architecture of the project, and this is how I see the project. I see the project developing from this question. So why is illiberalism gaining ground in a European party system? But before even trying to answer this question, what we need, according to me, are descriptive evidences. So the first pillar of the project will try to answer to this question. So how is illiberalism distributed across parties within European party system? In this pillar, for me, the important thing is of course, theorizing and defining, but also measure, because the idea is to get a data set on party-based illiberalism. The second pillar will deal with the systemic explanation. So here the idea is to investigate those explanations that operate at the party system level, and that, of course, can be endogenous or exogenous to political competition. And then finally, the last pillar of the project will aim at investigating the party-level explanation. So the explanation that deal with party competition. I'm aware that this is a bit a big bite, but I will try to clarify as much as I can this dimension of the project. So in the first pillar, as I said before, I will try to answer to the question how liberalism is distributed. The idea is that I will build on the operational definition that I have provided before, and the idea here is to create a cartography of illiberalism. This pillar will work mostly with Party Manifesto. The idea is to use the corpus that is available offline of Manifesto Project database, formerly MARP or CMP. I think most of you are familiar with this dataset. And the plan here is to encode a subsample of sentences from the comparative manifesto, and then use this, let's say, human coding with BERT and its variant in order then to fine-tune the coding of the manifesto. I will add something about this strategy later. For now, just let me say that the final goal here will be to build a large dataset across 18 countries, covering all the parties coded by the Manifesto Project dataset from 80s to today. And I will use a code book that I'm developing that will cover the issues applied dealing with the liberal pillar on minority rights, political and civil rights, horizontal accountability, and rule of law. And then for each of these issues, I will associate a stance. So a stance on the issue can be illiberal, borderline, neutral, or potentially also strengthening the liberal pillar. This design, I think, will allow us to answer to descriptive research question, and in this way we will be able to understand whether liberalism is clustered around specific ideology or around specific party families. And here I expect to find a variety of illiberal formula. For example, just to make an example, I would expect that illiberalism on minority rights will be a sort of leitmotif of radical right parties. However, I do not expect the same for those proposals that, for example, are challenging the right to protest or the right to political participation. This proposal might very well pushed, for example, by governing parties, right? Because they are acting as gatekeepers of political contestation. So, long story short, here I will plan to analyze the distribution of illiberalism, looking not only at the ideology, but also at party systemic location and institutional location. So, are mainstream and challenger more illiberal than the other? Are the actor more illiberal? Are those in opposition or are those in government? And paying also a look at the level of party institutionalization. So I think that this first part of the project will contribute to the understanding of the illiberal formula. I've been talked about large n and small n very quickly. I think that studying illiberalism and party-based illiberalism is, something that is important is try to isolate the party system feature, the systemic feature that can play a role. So I selected my cases on the basis of party system fragmentation and democratic institutionalization. So I end up with these 18 cases. And then for the small n analysis, the idea is to take also into account the degree of penetration of illiberal forces in governmental arena. So for the small n analysis, I will deal with countries where illiberal forces reached the governmental arena, Italy and Poland, cases where illiberal forces provide external support, Denmark, and cases where illiberal forces have been so far not part of the government, France. If this first part of the project is successful, I will end up with a nice data set with 18 countries, at least 150 elections, so numbers that are okay for trying to have some quantitative analysis to reach some kind of explanation on the main drivers of illiberalism. So I will, in the second part of the project, my plan is to test some expectation that we very often see in the literature, but they have never been tested empirically. So, general idea, when a little companion like SARS-CoV-19 join us, then liberal democracy can start working worse. So political parties might push illiberal solution. Corruption has been considered as a phenomenon pushing illiberal solution. Migration inflows. These are the exogenous factors that probably all of you have in mind and can have a role in illiberalism. Same things for, let's say, meso-level endogenous factor. So polarization, more polarized is a party system. We can expect more delegitimation among actors, maybe measure to reducing the space of dissent, but something similar we can expect in context in which we witness a depoliticization of the political space. Now, admittedly, this phenomenon that I've listed here can be are problematic for the arrow of causality, because they can be both, not all of them, but some of them can be both causes and consequences of the rising levels of illiberalism. So here, I think will be important to proceed carefully. The idea would be also to refine theory, let's say bottom-up, adding a bottom-up perspective in theory building. But of course, I don't expect that with this part of the project I will be able to say anything about causality that will then, be considered as a something part of the last pillar of the project, in which I will try to analyze diffusion of illiberalism across and within electoral cycle. First, let's say, line of this pillar could be developed using the main dataset, let's say, so using quantitative data. Here I've in mind something similar to the work of Abuchadi. Probably you are familiar here, classic from issue competition. The idea is that when a political party is successful within a party system, then the political party is pushing their competitor to imitate their stance on position and salience on the issue that they own. So we could expect that something similar maybe can occur with illiberalism, right? So liberal parties are successful, and then they push their competitors to imitate their stance on illiberalism. But what we can see on illiberalism could be also the opposite trend. So illiberal parties are successful, and they are provoking a reaction from the other parties that are politicizing pro-liberal feature of contemporary democracy. And this is in line, let's say, with the research line that have been recently developed by Ramona Coman and Natalie Brack on the idea of dissensus over liberal democracy. My goal here would be to try to triangulate Party Manifesto with other data sources. What I have in mind are keynote speeches delivered during electoral campaign, parliamentary question time, and coding also executive decree that can be seen in themselves also as indicator of abusive lawmaking and illiberalism. But what's the goal of this triangulation? So the first goal would be to check whether there is a coherence in the electoral cycle. So is illiberalism something that emerged during electoral campaign, or is something that we see in government? Why is important, this question? Because according to me, this will allow to understand whether illiberalism is a vote-attracting strategy. Parties are using illiberalism in order to attract vote, or is something that they consider as repellent during electoral campaign and then emerge in government. And in this respect, I plan to investigate the government-opposition nexus in order to assess if illiberalism tends to disappear when parties arrive in government, or whether the empirical result will indicate the other way around. Okay, so these are the three main axes that I am currently planning for the project. That, just to recap, consist in a large N descriptive phase, then I will have a large N systemic analysis, and finally a case-based analysis. This plan can change, of course. Seems to me a realistic agenda for the next 3 years, 2 years and 9 months, more or less. But of course, I will be super happy to hear your thoughts. Now, before concluding, I would like to discuss briefly some idea about measurement. We don't have time, I think, to discuss in detail the other measures and what's the problem with the other measure. What I think it's important to say here is that these measures, like V-Party, for example, they are measuring similar stuff, but they don't allow to look at illiberal formula in a fine-grained way. So we can have parties that are targeting judicial independence, like attacking Supreme Council of the Judiciary, other parties that are attacking horizontal accountability, criticizing constitutional courts, others that are attacking Roma people, others that are combining all these attacks all together. But if we use data like V-Party data, we are not able to grasp these differences in the liberal formula. And also, if we use more, let's say, fine-grained data, like the dictionary approach that have been developed by several colleagues over the last years, we can have like scores of illiberalism that of course are very useful, but then we are not able to dig about the policy, the liberal policy configuration that these parties are pushing forward. So, in order to reach this goal, what we need is something that classifies sentences into different issue domains, first task, and then we need to detect illiberal, borderline neutral, pro-liberal stances. Okay, so how we do it? The ideal option will be to hire a team of coders, train them, develop an amazing code books, of course, but this is not possible because it's just me doing this job. So the solution is just ask the help of the machines that are helping human beings since 18th century, and in this case I will ask help of large language models, BERT variants, and I think it will be an experience like frustrating as the usual manual coding. I will work here together with a colleague from Saarbrücken University, where they have a Center for Computational Social Science. And this will be more or less the strategy that I will follow. I will use the corpus of the Comparative Manifesto project in order to extract some codes that are already connected with the broader topic of illiberalism. Then I will go with a manual coding of these sentences, and then I will use this manual code in order to fine-tune the model. So this is more or less the flow. The first part of the training is not something that I will do, because I will use a version of BERT that is called Manifest BERT A, something like that. That is the version of the model that has been already trained by the Comparative Manifesto project, so they already know how manifestos are organized. And then the second part where I will try to contribute will be this process of fine-tuning or domain adaptation, in which I will include my coding I will use my coding to train the model, and then we will extend the coding to the rest of the Comparative Manifesto corpus. Now, this is the codebook. I don't want to, of course, enter in the detail of the codebook, but it's just to provide you an idea of the degree of complexity that I'm interested at. So I'm interested to have this 4 domain with some subcodes. Okay, so before to conclude, what I've been doing over the last weeks has been try to check this code with the Italian case. So basically, I isolated roughly 7,000 sentences from Italian manifesto. My most pressing question at this stage was simply understand whether it's possible to identify illiberal sentences in Party Manifesto, and the preliminary answer seems to me yes. In the top right panel here, what you see is the issues applied dealing with the liberal pillar. So here we can have sentences that are neutral, or they are even supporting the liberal pillar, and it shows the overall salience. These are expressed as a ratio, so these are the amount of sentences out the total sentences of the manifesto. So the first thing that we can see here is that the aggregated salience of the liberal pillar is quite high. It's ranging, in Italy, that is a peculiar case in this respect, is ranging between 15 and 18% of the manifesto. That is a lot. Just to make an example, elusive in the same period in Italy ranged between 3.5–4% of the manifesto. But of course, when we look at illiberal sentences, this amount decrease. But the interesting point is that even if decrease, we are still able to find illiberal sentences in the manifestos. And is a bit reassuring to see that when we try to disaggregate this data by party families, what we see is that, center-right party, far-right party, and valence populist parties are those with more illiberal sentences that are quite low among center-left and far-left parties, and this is in line with the expectation. This is just a very preliminary face validity, but that show a bit that this attempt can be promising and successful. Okay, so yeah, this is what I've already said, more or less. Just to say that this measurement, again, once more, the big asset that I see here is that it will provide an overview on the illiberal formula. So parties emphasizing illiberalism in different way, and we will be able to make differences and classification on these distinct illiberal challenges. So I will conclude here by saying that the overarching idea of the project is to remain embedded in party competition literature, but of course the ambition is to contribute also to, close field of research, clear comparative politics, mostly autocratization and resistance, but also legal scholarship and topics related with rule of law and abusive constitutionalism. I think that this project will provide, hopefully, a dynamic perspective on the supply side of illiberalism. We should be able, at the end of the project, to understand the drivers of illiberalism and the different configuration of illiberalism. Of course, there is a huge limitation that is the demand side. We are not talking about the demand side, and this is a pity, but hopefully this project can contribute in the elaboration of new batteries to understand even also better from a demand side perspective illiberalism. And in this respect, I mean, if you are working to similar topics, and if you are planning to run surveys over over the next years, we can discuss. I will be happy to discuss. We can try to find interesting idea. Okay, so that's all. Thank you a lot for your attention, and I look forward to receive your comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Leonardo, for this very interesting, relevant, and also very ambitious project. So thank you. We're going to open the floor now for some questions. So who has a question?
Thank you very much for the very clear and detailed presentation. So you defined illiberalism through restrictions on minority rights, the weakening of the rule of law, and pressures on civil society. So my question is, in your view, do these practices necessarily constitute a pathway toward authoritarianism, or can they exist like relatively stable or moderate form of illiberalism within democratic framework? In other words, does your research identify some empirical threshold at which illiberalism turns into authoritarianism, and how is recognized that threshold? Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to answer now, or would you like to take a couple of other questions?
Maybe it's better if I answer directly.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. It's an excellent question. I mean, I didn't thought in terms of empirical threshold. Of course, these are linked, and I think that this research can contribute to your question, because we will be able to find different forms of illiberalism. Clearly, from my perspective, when all the tension of illiberalism are concentrated together, then this is expected to be more dangerous. But then, according to me, something that we should also consider is that it is important also connect the supply with the electoral strength, right? Because at the end of the day, in European party system, we always had illiberal parties with a clear illiberal supply, but it's different if they are at the fringe of the party system or whether they are the core of the party system. So I think that answering to your question that is crucial will need both what you defined an empirical threshold in terms of supply, but also, let's say, functional threshold related to the role that these parties play within the party system, according to me. But thank you so much.
Thank you. This is really a fascinating project, a lot of food for thought. I have two interrelated questions, and one starts from the limitation that you mentioned yourself at the other presentation, which is not considering systematically the demand side, right? So my first question is why not even including, right? I'm thinking of big surveys that already exist, like the CSCS, because when you were talking in the beginning, and I'm completely biased because I do exactly the opposite of what you do, right? I study the demand and not the supply. But when you were at the beginning asking why do we have this supply, right? Also in mainstream parties of illiberal policies, all the exemptions that you showed were linked basically to security, almost all. But for me, as somebody who studied behaviors, the thing that I had back in my mind was it's linked to the perception of threat, right? So even mainstream parties, when their supporters, when the voters, when mainstream citizens feels that there is a threat, they feel that they have to go in places that address those concerns, right? And they often then go into these illiberal kind of policies. Often. It happens. Unfortunately, maybe not often. So why not looking at, for example, in the CSCS, on the Eurobarometer, on the European Social Survey, on what is, for example, the perception of security, which could be a proxy to understand what is the demand side without having to run an expensive survey yourself. That's my first question. And the second is linked to the question that was just asked to you, right? And you said, yeah, there are fringes. It's different when things are linked to the fringe, so when illiberalism is linked to the fringes. And here, even at the party level, I think one could push back and say, well, first of all, I can think at least of a couple of examples in Europe, Italy, for example, but also Austria, in which people that voted for, let's say, extreme right parties, FPO, Fratelli d'Italia, actually position themselves as a 5 in a left-right continuum. So they're not at the fringe at all. They think themselves as a center, but they still vote for parties that very often have in mind illiberal policies, especially with respect to, for example, protection of minorities. And what happens actually when those parties, even in places where, so I'm thinking about now France, but even Belgium and even Germany, where you have a cordon sanitaire, but these parties actually become 25% of the electorate, right? Can we still consider to be them fringe? We can consider them to be fringe ideologically, but not in the population anymore. So how do you deal with these tensions?
These are both excellent questions and comment. Yeah, I mean, of course, I'm also thinking about explore the demand side using a survey that are already there. Actually, I have a couple of papers in submission already that are doing something, even if not very ambitious. But this idea that you are proposing of considering threat as a driver for developing illiberal attitudes is interesting, and thank you for it.
It's not my idea, just as a disclaimer.
Yeah. The point here is that then, I mean, I'm not super satisfied about the batteries that are out of there in order to measure illiberalism. I mean, there are nice items, the one on judges, the one on media, but it's difficult that you find all of them together. Maybe Jean-Benoit has something that solved the issue, let's say. But yeah, I mean, it's the dependent variable that for me will be a bit problematic. And honestly, I have no nice idea now to propose to someone in order to then start, let's say, an exploration of the demand side. But of course, I think this is extremely relevant. Going to your second point about, I mean, the link again between supply and demand, and the fact that we have voters that don't consider themselves as extremist or illiberal that then end up voting for a liberal party. This is a very interesting idea, and is something that I saw quite recently with a paper on the Italian center-right-wing demand. So we explored a bit the demand side towards the right-wing coalition from the 90s to nowadays. And actually you would expect these voters to radicalize, considering that the center of the coalition changed from a, let's say, moderate party, even if populist, to a radical right parties. But at the end, the voters are more or less the same in their location on the left-right axis and on migration. So, of course, this called for a question, but again, according to me, the question would be more, the answer to the question would be more related to the supply. Because if the voters stay more or less the same, so if the moderate voters are available to vote illiberal parties, then we should understand the path, according to me, that these illiberal parties have from the fringe to the center of the stage and of their party system. And I think that in this respect would be interesting to understand the way in which they frame their supply. And I hope that the project will help to understand whether parties use a lot illiberalism during the electoral campaign. I mean, if we see that illiberalism is rising like in speeches, this will be an evidence that parties are actively using illiberalism to get votes, consensus, blah, blah, blah. But let's see. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation and the introduction of the project. It looks amazing, and I think that also the core idea of illiberalism or something emerging from the illiberal script itself, for me is, yeah, like a great hook for the project, and excited to see how it develops. My main question has to do with, because you mentioned that you're gonna use, like now you mentioned speeches as well, but in terms of the computational part, manifestos would be the crux of the project, right?
Yeah.
And like to preface that, like I understand why you use them. Like first of all, you don't need to negotiate with big tech to give you data. Secondly, there's pre-trained BERT model that works on that. So by no means don't take this comment as the like something dissuading from that. But I wonder, like as you started with examples of illiberal actions by mainstream parties, for example, with Danish Social Democrats, I would suspect that, for example, that's not something that would show up in the manifesto, right? Especially for the parties in the left. I would expect discrepancy between what actual policies are and what they might profess to believe in their manifestos to be larger. And I think that is also something that you can turn to your advantage, in a sense that, in a way, for me at least, like also looking from a bit like communication perspective, that is a bit of the least likely place to find illiberalism, in a way, because those are really documents that parties carefully position themselves. Like there's way more intentionality behind the message and what it's gonna be. But I mean, I want to put you on the spot. Like we can talk about it further, but like also to think about what this like, are you, okay, to simplify, like, are you measuring commitment to liberalism or illiberalism, or the discursive commitments in those manifestos? Because that is something they think it's not necessarily a problem, but in terms of how you portray your findings and how generalizable they are, that's perhaps the area to be vigilant to an extent. And thank you so much again.
Thank you so much for these comments. That is an interesting warning, because I mean, this is I mean, when you use data on the manifesto, this is always the difficulties, right? Because you have a perspective of a party, but it's just one phase. Then there are other phases that you will not see using manifesto data. For my research question, at least, I think that manifesto are the right place, precisely because we want to see whether parties use their liberalism to get consensus, going back to the previous question. So in this respect, I defend the choice of the manifesto as a source with all the limitation. And I also agree that if we find something in the manifesto, we will find something also in other places, because of course this will be the place where parties are hiding their illiberalism. But of course, the fact that we don't find illiberalism in manifesto, this doesn't mean that there is no illiberalism in the party system. And the idea indeed would be that the big part of the project will be with this computational data set with illiberalism. And then hopefully I would like to conduct some case studies in which I can complement the data that I have from manifesto with speeches during the election, and some elements of practices. So I was thinking to executive decrees that could be, of course, that need to be coded in a slightly different way, but could be a way to complement the perspective, according to me. But I mean, I will definitely take care of the warning, because it's super on point. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much for your presentation. I also really love the project, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing where it goes and to reading your papers. I have the question that I've been having. You started sort of answering it, so I'll just pick up on the very last point that you said, which was the part of the practices. Because when you started presenting your definition of illiberalism, you said you see it as a set of practices and ideas, which I found really interesting and exciting. But then for me, when I hear practices, I think Leonardo Puleo, I think, socially meaningful activities, patterns of actions, this kind of direction. But then your research is going a bit of a different way, right? Like with this computational analysis, it's a bit of maybe the other end of looking at parties and at actors. So I did wonder, where do the practices actually come in? Do they come in? Or what do you mean when you said practices in your definition? Maybe I just have a different view than you do. So I would be interested in hearing how you're planning to look at this.
Well, I think that you have a more grounded view on practice than I have, so I'm going step by step, trying to develop some ideas. So to me, in the definition, the goal was to going beyond like ideas and ideology, because we can have illiberal elements that are embedded both in manifesto and in legislative activity that are not closely connected with ideas. So we need to get these elements that I mean, we cannot define as ideas, and so for this reason I use the label practices. I have in mind something similar to what Glausius, I don't remember the first name of this scholar, Marlene, I think, defined authoritarian practices. something along those lines. This is more or less the direction that I'm trying to look at. But it's true that there is a bit this tension in between the data source and the notion of practice. Because at the end, in the manifesto, we are not seeing the practice, but we are seeing, I mean, the promise of a practice. And this is a tension. I have to think a bit more about this tension and try to find a bit a solution in order to improve it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Leonardo, for the presentation. Let's go back to your concept. Because I think there is a challenge that we've seen in other fields that try to develop the concept, especially in, like, that was recently in debate on populism and what it means. And so it's going back to concept formation and to Sartori and to the idea that the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts. And if that's true, is there a risk in what you do that the four components are used to quantify how intense or how strong illiberalism is? But the risk is that you're going to forget that you need the four components to be illiberal. And so if I look at what you've done for the Italian party manifestos, the conclusion would be there is no illiberalism at all. Because what you would have is one dimension or two dimension, but even if you're strong on two dimensions of illiberalism, you're still not illiberal, because you would need the four to be present together. And so I wonder how you're going to deal with that. I'm not saying, doesn't mean that it's irrelevant to say that when you analyze party communication, you find that, from what I've seen, the minority rights dimension is very much discussed and might be challenged. It's not illiberalism, it's just an attack to minority rights. But if you don't have the three other dimensions, that's not illiberalism. So how do you deal with that for party, for measuring illiberalism within party? And then if we go to the demand side, I know it's not part of your project, but that would still raise a point, which is there is no illiberalism on the demand side. If you take what would be the closest to a good measurement of that, that would be the Monica Ferrin and Hans-Peter Krisi modules in ESS that has been replied, and they show that the most important dimension of democracy according to citizen is rule of law and protection of minorities before free and fair election. And that concern more than 90% of Europeans. So at least they have that. Does not mean that they can't have problems with some minorities, but at least if you use that idea that you need the four dimension, you don't have a demand side. And it's a very puzzling question. Why do voters that are not illiberal do vote for illiberal parties or parties that defend that? Does that mean that they are, I don't know, liberal chauvinists, that they like a lot liberalism, but just for the in-group? Or does that mean that they are second order liberal, that they care about liberalism, but they care more about the welfare state or their pension or whatever? So I think in those two approaches, that raises the core question, which is when you have your four dimensions, is it a sum of the four dimensions and you can be more or less illiberal, or you need the four dimensions to be illiberal?
Thank you for this question that, is hitting a topic that, I've tried to reflect on this issue. So how to understand this criteria, if understand as a criteria that I have to sum in order to, if I am understanding them as a sufficient criteria or as a sufficient and necessary criteria. Again, also in this case, I don't have the answer because I think we will have. I think that probably it's not it's never the right way to proceed. But this is maybe one of the cases in which you need that triangulation between theory and data. in order to clarify, because here we have the elements of the number of criteria, but then we have also the elements of the intensity of the criteria, right? Because something different is whether you have a limited salience on something. Another thing, if you have all your manifesto that is attacking like minority rights. These are two different things, and probably this should be treated differently. My perspective here is that I would like to build both my definition but also my code book in a modular way, more or less as a Lego, in order to give me then the time to think a bit more about how to combine these features. Because of course, the most straightforward idea is that true illiberalism is only when you have all these four challenges. But it's also true that maybe all these challenges are not exactly on the same way, precisely because there is a contamination. So, I mean, if you are illiberal on minority rights, if you are attacking minority rights, and that's all, you say you are not illiberal. I tend to agree with you. But in the case you are like attacking the judiciary, and this is all your political supply. You are saying the judiciary, we should control judges. This is our plan. We need to, and we have parties that are saying this story. We need to control judges. In this case, you are illiberal, according to me, even if you are saying only this attack. Now, how to translate this into like a strong definition with sufficient and necessary attributes is something that is not clear. My idea is, as I said, is to go start with theory, then data, and then go back. Maybe we will discuss later if you think that this is the right approach. But yeah, this will be my answer at the very beginning. And the puzzle that you pose for the demand side is also interesting. I have some doubt about the way in which they are measuring the rule of law. In that survey, rule of law is something like law should be equal for everyone, something like that. I mean, is a very we can dispute whether this is rule of law or if just this is rule of law. But yeah, there is a puzzle. But this is a puzzle that we can extend also something similar to what Luana was saying before, right? We have voters that doesn't look so illiberal, so extremist, but then they vote for parties they are. So this is a puzzle that, of course, we should try to solve, but it's common to different subfields, according to me.
Hi, Leonardo. My question has to do with earlier on when you made the definition of illiberalism, and you said that it obviously takes from the liberal script. I'm interested in how your research or your thinking caters for the idea of misinformation and disinformation, because I think a lot of party politics these days relies a lot on information that may not necessarily be accurate in order to empower their own narrative to appeal to the right audiences. And of course, this is highly effective in order for people to react to political emotions. So you've got to have to use the right story, you've got to have to use the story that people want to hear, but most often that story may not be packaged in an accurate, reliable, and in most instances factual manner. So I'm wondering how your research kind of speaks to that. Thank you.
Well, I don't think I will be able to directly target the topic of misinformation, disinformation. It's crucial, of course, but it's a bit distinct from the attempt on illiberalism that I'm trying to pursue here in the project. But it's true that, according to me, the debate on misinformation, disinformation, the point is that it's researched a lot by communication scholars and so on, but something that maybe is missing is that it's not very well integrated in the debate on like democratic norm, this kind of stuff. So when we focus on transgression, we are very often focusing on institutional transgression, and we are not focusing that much on discursive, truth-related kind of transgression. But I don't think this will be a topic that I will be able to capture with this design and with these data sources and with this project. But of course, I mean, it's crucial. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonardo. I had a couple of points myself. I mean, to begin with, it's good to see how you're turning a project into something that you're actually doing, and I see the challenge and a lot of room to get excellent data and interesting findings. I had one point on measurement, perhaps goes in the direction of what Jean-Benoit was saying before. I mean, first of all, in your scale, in my understanding, you miss one category, because you have an intermediate category between neutral and directly liberal, but not between neutral and pro-liberal. And I think then it's skewed in a sense. But more broadly, how is the measurement coherent with the conceptualization that you have? I mean, if you have discussed and presented literature showing how some illiberal elements can be part of the very script of liberalism, like Lo Surdo or Desmond King. But then you measure it as a direct opposition between the two extremes. So I mean, one of the two is, I mean, I see a contradiction there in a certain sense, or at least I don't see how your measurement actually could tap into what Lo Surdo or King are suggesting. A second point that I have about the concept would be, this is really a question, where would you locate militarism, for instance, among those four dimensions? And I mean, I don't want to sound too grim, but I mean, you don't have war as a trigger of illiberalism, but it looks like it is, and it looks like it might be in the near future. So I would also perhaps try to look at how this can be integrated there. Thank you.
Thank you, Pietro. I will start with your last question about militarism and war, and this is something that I've discussed also with other colleagues. The fact that, of course, I didn't include as a trigger, but the point is that I didn't include in the code book. And actually something to consider also, because we have a huge literature on liberal with the end of the liberal order, the international liberal order, blah blah blah. So the question is, should also the attitudes towards international relation be considered as a part of illiberalism? For Laruelle and other scholars, yes, this is part of illiberalism. I'm still thinking whether this should be included or not. I see the advantage. The disadvantage are that the coding will be less coherent, and that the risk is that something could be a bit broad, because at the end of the day, parties can say different things in their manifesto about international relations, but then only like the parties with the realistic chances to get in government will change the path of their foreign alliances. So I don't know. I'm still thinking. I have no final answer. Then, regarding the measurement and the contradiction on the measurement, I have to say that I'm not so convinced because of your point. Because of course the scale is skewed, and I have to think how I want to make it better. Because the point there is that you have some sentences that you cannot classify as illiberal because they are not, but they are putting tension with for example, separation of power. But then the scale is skewed, so some fine tuning is needed there. But your let's say theoretical question related to the fact that I'm not in line with what I was saying, that illiberalism can be built within the liberal script. This is something that a bit disagree, because with the coding, what we will show is that parties emphasize or de-emphasize liberal or illiberal position, full stop. Then, I mean, this is open to the fact, so following in this, according to me, King and Losurdo, that both liberal and illiberal party can do this emphasis. I'm not measuring justification, because then this will be the argument of Desmond King, because then the argument of Desmond King is that not only liberal party propose illiberal policies, but then they are justifying these illiberal policies in the name of liberalism. This is something that I don't have in my work. My work stops before the justification, because I cannot find justification in manifesto. Maybe this is something that could enter in the small n part of the story, but not in the large n. So probably I should be more clear then I will write something, and so like defend from this criticism, but it's not something that I see now. Thank you.
Okay, Leo, thank you very much. Looks like a fascinating but also a very ambitious project with many different dimensions, so you've got quite a lot of work ahead of you. Not to add to complexity, but I did have one or two questions that might be relevant. The first one is, I really like how you link the rise or the use of illiberalism and liberal discourses to ideology, systemic location, institutional location, and then party institutionalization. I was wondering if your data would also allow you to maybe study on which issues illiberalism manifests itself, and whether you see that there's kind of a spread. So traditionally, I would assume that these types of discourses, they would manifest on immigration, minority rights, judicial independence, and so on. But I have an intuition, and you might give me a definitive answer in 3 years' time, whether these types of discourses actually spread to different issues as well, such as like vaccination, technology, cultural policies, scientific knowledge, and so on. So I have my first question is on the issues. And then maybe my second one is, parties and politicians, they use these illiberal discourses for a reason. They strategically use them, right? And it's probably not part of the goals of your project, but are there any plans to investigate what the consequences of these illiberal discourses are on voters? Whether the use of these discourses kind of triggers something among voters or not? So these are my two questions.
Thank you so much for this excellent question. Regarding the first one, so regarding how illiberalism can intersect different issues, and also how the issues that illiberalism intersect can change over time. This is something super interesting, and is something that in my plan could be achieved, because when the dataset will be realized, then we will have two codes. We will have the codes of my codebook, let's say, and the codes of the comparative manifesto. So this, theoretically speaking, should be a possible triangulation. And so this will also tell us whether illiberalism is always on those issues. So from the 80s up nowadays, illiberalism is always on migration, or whether is expanding on different issue domains. So this is something that hopefully, I hope, an exploration that could that in the future I will be able to realize. Then your second question: why party use illiberalism? I mean, this is an empirical question. Part of the, I hope that the project will answer a bit to the question. As I was saying this at the end of the speech, is an empirical question, according to me, to understand whether illiberalism is higher in campaigns or in other phases. This would be already a preliminary question, so a preliminary answer, sorry. So understand whether during electoral campaign parties are emphasizing liberalism, because we'll suggest, as you imply, that parties are attracting voters on illiberalism. And then, I mean, the second part of your question is whether this has an impact on voters. This is something that in this design fall outside the project, but should be investigated. But I would say more, all the discussion that is on the consequences of illiberalism is something that is outside the project. And this is not just related to voters, but is also related to political regime. In this current fashion, I'm saying nothing about the impact of liberalism on institution, on accountability, on other, let's say, measures of democratic quality. And of course, these are potential area of cross-fertilization, and that I hope that I will be able, if everything is successful, I hope that I will also able to add something on this later on. But thank you for the input.
Are there any other questions? We still have time, so. If not, then I think we can conclude today's lecture. Thank you so much, Leonardo.